Well, good afternoon again, and welcome to this last session, which is, as you've probably read already, on social learning. Apparently, humans are all social animals, and we do so many things in communities of one sort or another, and why not learning? But certainly in my experience, social learning is one of those complex things which we all know we should do, but not everybody does. Management should certainly facilitate it, but they can't push it. So you always have this sort of difficulty of how you're really going to make it work and how you're really going to make it succeed. As we all know, it most definitely can. So we need a real expert on the subject, and the speaker this afternoon is certainly one of them. He's a member of the Internet Time Alliance and has his blog, which you definitely should check out. So that's enough from me, I'm sure. Let me introduce and please give a big welcome to Harold Jarche.
Thanks, Vaughn. We're good on the mic, right? Okay. Hi. Who knows me? Who's never heard of me? Just coming here on spec, okay? I'm just trying to get an idea of how much I got to tell you about myself. I'll give you a real short background. I took my first methods of instruction course in 1974, and we used the Canadian Army Manual of Training on teaching to do that. So, and I'm now talking today about social learning, and so basically everything that was in the Canadian Army Manual of Training is not what I'm going to be talking about. I've been in the training business for a long time. I'm no longer consider myself in the training business, and I'm interested. When Don asked me to speak, he had looked at some of the stuff that I'd published and some of the work that I had done on from training to performance support to social, and he said, that's kind of interesting. That might be something that we might want to have here. And that came out of I was working with some clients, and what we found was that we had particularly more traditional training, formal, structured, instructional design group over here. And it was like, we got to be social media, connected, and get all this stuff together. And what we found over time working with several clients is that in some cases that was a really hard jump. And in working with them and developing different programs, what we learned was that performance improvement or human performance technology actually provided a nice little stepping stone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the logic flow of that and be really interested in feedback on how that goes. And then I'll focus on why social learning is important. So if you're here for tools or for anything like that, I'm not talking about any of those. So doors, we can move on there. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and I got a couple more later. So who considers themselves a learning professional? Or if someone said, are you a learning professional? You'd say, yeah. Okay, who definitely is not in the learning business? I mean business, like we're all in the, I mean, we all have to learn. Is it okay? Who would say they're in the training business? Okay. There's no right answer. I'm just trying to get a feel here, okay? Instructional design. Few, okay. Human performance technology or performance improvement. HPT, few, okay, good. Social learning. Okay, all right. Collaborative learning. Okay. Anybody else got something else that they would say, like, you know, you missed one here, Harold? Anybody? Bueller? No? Nobody? Okay, so I've covered them all. Okay, that's interesting to see where we're at on that. So that was the first question. Okay, here's the second question. And there's no right answer. What I want you to do is I want you to think about time at work, usually at work. It could be at home. It could be with a professional association or something like that. And you know somebody. It could be a peer, colleague, your boss, and quite often. And this person has a problem. They're either not delivering the work, they're not cooperating with you, they're doing things wrong, I mean, has anybody never ever had a problem at work? Okay, we've got that straightened out. Good. Okay, so I want you to think about it. And as soon as you got, just put your hand up quickly, put it down. As soon as you just get an idea about, I remember that person, okay? I remember what it was. You don't have to think too much about it. Everybody getting, yeah, we're getting, okay. You remember that, that one person that, yeah, finally, or maybe you had to quit because of it or something like that. Okay, so you got the issue in your mind, okay? And I know that's, so-and-so and what they did that time. Okay. What was the cause of the problem? Generally. It could have been number 7, it might have been something else in there. Okay. How many would say that there was a problem between what that person expected or the feedback that they were getting? Number 1. Any? Okay, we've got a couple there. Number 2, they just didn't have the tools or the resources to do it, right? No, tools and resources a little bit less, okay. Consequences and incentives, right? They weren't being punished for it, they weren't being rewarded for it, or there was a mix upon what they thought was important. And with some of those, yeah, got a few. Okay, skills and knowledge. They just didn't have, they didn't have the skill to be able to, putt the golf ball, or they didn't have the knowledge on that. Okay, got a few in there. Individual capacity. They just couldn't cut it. That's everybody's boss, yeah, okay. I think that's the number 5 would be the Peter principle. Motives and preferences. Just weren't motivated. Well, that's a pretty biggie. I'd say that almost would be like the big one. Does anybody know where I'm going with this? Kind of. See, that's the problem. Right? If we are in the training business, training can only address that problem. And of all the performance problems that we identified here, there's only a percentage of those, right? And I say that, I've said this for many, many years, training is a solution looking for a problem, right? And the other interesting thing is that it's not just a lack of skills and knowledge, it's new skills and knowledge. And why is that? If it was old skills and knowledge, would they need training? No. They would need some time to practice it, to get some feedback, and some practice to develop the skills, right? So training isn't a problem if they've already done it before, or training isn't the solution. Sorry, I keep saying training is a problem, right? It's a solution, yeah. Has anybody ever gone to the doctor and said this? I take that as a no. Right? I mean, we don't go in, we don't say, I've got an aspirin problem, right? We say, I've got a sore back. We say, I've got a headache, right? And what does the doctor do? Doctor does a diagnosis, right? And tries to figure out what is the cause, and it could be several causes of that problem. They take a look at the system, right? And then they try to determine why is it that we have that, and then they say, I think that aspirin would be the solution to help you, right? And then of course, and so that's the creation of the intervention that they do, right? So anybody coming to you, if you're in the training business, and says, I got a training problem, you can hang this up on the wall and say, no, you've got an aspirin problem, and we don't deliver them. Right? So is anybody here a certified performance technologist, CPT? I was one of those years ago. I'm not anymore. I didn't pay the money to keep renewing. But if you want everything you want to know about performance improvement is on one slide. And I actually have a document. If you look for performance analysis on my website, there's about a 5-6 page PDF, and it gives this and everything else about how to do it. But basically, it boils down to, and I use a medical analogy. I was a hospital administrator in a previous life, and triage, diagnosis, and treatment. Right? Everybody knows what triage is? Who here speaks French? Trier, right? What's that? Sort them out. First thing you do is you got to sort the problem. Okay? That's what triage comes from. Sorting the ones that we can heal, and coming from the military as well, the ones that we would not heal and would have to go aside. Right? So they call that the opportunity or the gap. Right? Right? And then we say, what's the cause? And the cause breaks down into 3 main groups. If you are an adherent of the HPT cult, right? It's either a lack of information and tools, a lack of incentives and motivation or a lack of skills and knowledge. And it's color-coded here that if it's skills and knowledge, it's a learning kind of thing. And training or job aids or information could be the solution. If it's incentives and motivation, then we got to change the environment, the selection, the mentoring, compensation, those kinds of stuff. And if it's a lack of information and tools, then it's work systems, right? That we need to have better tools. We need to have, you know what? If we put a phone in everybody's office, they might talk to each other, right? That would be a tools kind of thing. So that, in summary, is human performance technology, performance analysis. And the one thing that emerges from all of this is the rule is diagnose before prescribing. Okay? There's no such thing as a training problem. And I was a practitioner of HPT. I learned it in the military as a training specialist. And because we would look at operational requirements, and we would have to translate that into training solutions and other types of tools. And it works. I still use it. It's in my toolbox, but it misses out on the social aspect. It doesn't look at that whole human, messy social stuff. Some of the stuff those qualities that Gerrit Leonhardt was talking about this morning, right? This misses out on that completely. Because actually, if you take a look at my experience coming out of the military, I finished as a training specialist and developed helicopter training. And this is the CFITES, Canadian Forces Individual Training and Education System. I know that the British military has a similar system. The American military does. They use some different languages about it. Anybody here with the military, ex-military, want to join the Army? Okay. And so really what you take a look at that, and what it says? It says, well, there's strategic guidance, right? We know that we've got, operational requirements, and that we do a needs assessment. Most people here probably know what a needs assessment is. And then we develop training based and using methodologies such as instructional systems design or instructional systems development. ADDIE, anybody not know what ADDIE is? Just in case. You can say it because I'll explain it. Okay, good. So ADDIE is a methodology for developing formal instruction: analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. Right? Comes from the military. All this stuff comes out of the military. And if you look at most large corporations, government institutions, large bodies, is that they have emulated the military training system, or the SAT, the systems approach to training. Right? And that's kind of good. You say, well, the military, they know what they're doing. I mean, they train soldiers and sailors and airmen and all different kinds of people, right? But here's the question. Anybody here been to Afghanistan? Yeah, okay, so? What's the answer? Yeah. I'm glad you got that. He's not a plant, honest. I said not quite. And why is that? Okay, the military has learned something ever since before Caesar's armies, right? Is that you could train people in the skills, sword fighting or whatever it is that you're doing, but to actually have the organization work together, you had to do what in the Canadian Army is called collective training. So you get trained soldiers, they go through a battle school or for some kind of a schooling type of thing where they have their lectures, they do their training, they graduate, they get checked off, they go to Sandhurst, those kinds of things. And then they come to a unit, right? And the unit works together. No unit usually is deployed to a place like Afghanistan until that unit has worked, all the units, the subunits, and the groups of people have worked together, right? And when you take a look at the collective training, what is it? It's informal, right? It's go out and do an exercise, simulation, and do stuff together quite often. And usually it's with a fairly loosely run kind of thing. You've got, okay, your job today is to practice section attacks or something like that, right? So and what else is it? They're all working together, they're sleeping together, or they're not sleeping together because they're not sleeping, and it's very social, right? So it's informal and it's social. Why? Because they know that to be an effective group, that it doesn't matter how good an individual soldier is, it's how good is the group. And when actually you think about companies and organizations and anything else, does it matter how good the star is? Or I think in some companies they have these, they call them high pose, high potential employees. They get anointed, they get special training because they're high potential and they can move up, right? What does that do for the unit? What does that do for the morale? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit on the social side. Is anybody confused about the difference between social learning and social media? Does anybody think social media is social learning? Because I'd gladly dive in a little bit on that, okay? Okay, so social media are tools that let people connect easily, right? They have social in them, which means I can follow you, you can follow me, I can pin what you have, I can retweet it, I can like it, I can do a whole bunch of different kinds of stuff, and it's easy for people to connect together. Whereas social learning, if I use an example, I usually use Albert Bandura's work. I don't know if you're familiar with Bandura, who really, in the 70s, he didn't invent the notion of social learning, but he researched it a lot. And really what it boils down to is that social learning is modeling behavior. We as humans, we talked about social, Vaughn mentioned that, is that we're social creatures. Oh yes, we are, right? And you can see that the way people are dressed, the way people dress for work, the way people act, why do different cultures laugh at jokes, and other ones don't tell jokes, or why do people sit on their hands, or why they do all those kinds of things. We learned all that stuff socially. We don't even know that we're learning socially, right? It's that it happens, and it's very, very powerful. Because if we didn't learn socially, we would not survive as a species, right? Evolution has turned us into very social learning animals. That's how we pass on information from generation to generation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. This is a bit of a busy slide. This is sort of my latest thinking on work. See, the thing is that when it comes to training and learning and the institutionalizing of what we've been doing, it doesn't matter, right? Because the way that work is done, the way in which value is generated, the way in which society operates is going to drive what becomes important. An example of that is that we didn't have business schools, right, until General Motors needed one. And that's why we got, you know, Alfred Sloan, Sloan School of Business, right? Alfred Sloan was the first CEO of General Motors. And it was like, I need some place that is going to help develop my managers, my senior managers. And we created B schools out of a business need. So this right here, this is based on work Tom Graham, a good friend and partner of mine, Lou Adler, who does most of his writing through LinkedIn. Actually, he publishes a lot on that. And Gary Hamel, anybody know Gary Hamel? He wrote the book, The Future of Management. Good book, definitely worth reading. He's doing a lot of stuff right now with The Mix, I think it's called, about basically the future of management. So here, if you take a look at this here, we take a look at jobs and work. And this definitely aligns with what Garrett was talking about, is that when you take a look on the left-hand side, standardized work, right? And on the right-hand side, customized. So the blue is standardized, and that in jobs or work, jobs that are routine or work that is producing things, it's mostly standardized work and a little bit of customized work, right? Okay, and we know the difference between standardized is stuff that can be codified, and customized is stuff that has to be made up, bespoke, specific to the context. And then we have technical and improving types of jobs and work, and then, you know, a little bit less standardized, a little more on customized. And then we move to craft and building, where it's now shifting more to customized work, and innovative and thinking, where more on the customized. And then taking a look at the different, so I call standardized work labor, right? And Gary Hamel, when he talked about the 20th century work requirements, he identified those three traits that you needed in the 20th century, more industrialized type of workplace. On the right-hand side, what I call talent, that's where Gary said that, you know, really what he calls the creative economy, we need initiative, creativity, and passion. Definitely aligns with what Garrett was showing this morning in terms of the trends that we're seeing, right? And then if you take a look at learning, knowledge, and value, so does anybody disagree with that? You need more informal on the customized side. Knowledge is more implicit, which means it can't be codified. It's like a recipe book is something you can codify, so if I'm a short order chef or short order cook, you know, I can probably work on a recipe book. But if I am the, you know, the head chef at a fine 5-star restaurant, then I'm probably going to be working way up on the implicit type of stuff, the stuff that can only be taught through time and a lot of modeling, a lot of social learning. Right? And the same thing with value. Now this is really interesting, is that tangible value, everyone knows what that is, tangible, so like, I'm producing stuff, right? So you take a look at a worker, the initial studies that were done by Frederick Winslow Taylor in the 1910s, 1920s, he took a look and he looked at how coal was shoveled. And then they determined the optimal way in which a worker could shovel coal. Well, you can do that, it's tangible. It's a guy, in all cases it was a guy, a shovel, coal, measure it, and they did the initial time and motion studies that then created the scientific principles of management. Right? But when you actually when you take a look at Google or Apple or any of the newer companies out there, is that the value is much more intangible, right? A new design. Well, yeah, the finished product, you've got that, or a new way of doing things, right? So more and more is that this type of work is creating intangible value. And if you look at the stock indexes, whether it's Standard & Poor's or the Dow Jones or anything like that, you take a look at the changes in tangible to intangible value. And that in the 1970s, most stock indexes were 10 to 20% intangible. That was stuff like corporate brand and the stuff that the accountants don't know. They just say intangible and they put in a little box. Now, the S&P 500 is over 85% intangible value. So that means that what's driving our economy is this ephemeral stuff that nobody can really capture. Now, what that means, a couple of things. One is that we're getting fluctuations that are going up and down all over the place. Because Google can be great, but if I create a better algorithm that does better search than Google, they will lose almost all their customers overnight, right? So not only is it intangible, but it's not like I got all this gold. It's like I've got all this idea. And look how quickly companies can lose their brand value. We're having issues with Lululemon right now in Canada, the new, I don't know if you know the company, the yoga clothing, which is one of the hottest things around. But anyway, they lost a lot of brand equity because they were selling almost transparent yoga pants to ladies, and that didn't work very well. So anyway, there's a new CEO in on that. So this, I think, this is a summary of a lot. There's a lot on my blog on that if you're more interested in the whys of that, and I'm very interested if you want to talk about that online or here. So let's take a look at the IPPR. So that's the paper was called A Critical Path Securing the Future of Higher Education in England. Just out last week, it came across my desk. Institute for Public Policy Research, Commission on the Future of Higher Education. Has anybody seen this report? No? Okay, okay, so it's real. I didn't make it up, honest. But take a look at this. All right, so we're going from 1970 to 2006, right? And the lines, and they're color-coded, so I can figure it out. So knowledge-based is up, services are steady, manufacturing is down. Does anybody not see that trend? Not see that trend in their lives and in reality? Okay, so I mean, this is clear, right? Is that when we're actually taking a look at the types of work being done, is that growth is in the knowledge intensive. So knowledge intensive work, according to IPPR, tends to rely on high levels of general education, well, they don't say formal, and tacit knowledge rather than tasks and practices written down in manuals, guides, and procedures. So which aligns with the previous slide, right? So we're seeing is that work and jobs are shifting to the right. So if the jobs are craft and building, or innovative and thinking, that means it needs informal learning to support it because formal won't work. Why? Because it can't be codified quickly enough, and it's very contextual. Need ways to share implicit knowledge. I know how to do, how do I deal with a difficult customer or with that particular client or something like that, the kind of stuff that, you know, or how do you do a psychiatric diagnosis. And the value more and more is intangible value that you're bringing to the organization. So Gary Hamel, when he talks about the creative economy, says that the engine for the creative economy is talent. Now, trying to work through a logic flow here. Does anybody sort of strongly disagree with that? Yeah, okay, yeah, we can pause and check that, yeah.
It's not that I disagree, but people don't instantly appear in their talent. They need the learning and development to get them to the stage.
Oh, I'm not saying how you get there. I'm just saying that the valued work that is being done is talent, okay? Now, is there a correlation between developing those labor types of skills? That's a very interesting question, you know, and I don't have an answer. So is that, would you first have to have obedience, diligence, and intelligence, if you agree with that, in order to then get initiative, creativity, and passion, or does having those skills preclude you from developing those other skills? I don't have an answer. Like for me, all that this is showing me is that this is where people are going to get paid money to do stuff, or get paid, or get some kind of compensation for it. Because again, work drives the learning support. It doesn't work if universities are going to be, you know, only graduating basket weavers, it doesn't mean that every company will hire a basket weaver. Yeah.
One point about that graph, the graph showing the type of manufacturing. The danger of that is that's manufacturing jobs in this country,
Yeah.
and actually what's happened is manufacturing has gone to China. So,
But manufacturing jobs in China are going down. They're being replaced by robots. That's what the data is showing us right now. So I think that they say this is in the developed world. So this is happening in Canada, it's happening in America. And it's just that the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and whatever are just slightly behind on the curve. But I think what Garrett said is that everything that can be automated will be automated. And that's because manufacturing in terms of productivity is coming back to America right now, right? But but instead of having 500 people in a factory, they've got 20. So I am being simplistic on this, and I understand. I mean, and there are a lot of nuances on it. But I think that what I think is important is that we ask the question and say, does this model help me make any decisions, or is it useless for the certain cases, and which it could be.
Sorry, sir, to amplify your last point, is it also a case of that manufacturing that's coming back to the United States, and indeed the manufacturing that's coming back to the UK, is actually the creative, the artisan, the specialist, the high-end manufacturing, and not the stuff done by robots called Robot?
Well, what I'm finding, one of my clients was the Textile Human Resource Council of Canada a few years back. And the trend that they saw was they said, okay, 20 years ago, you would have a textile company, and they would have 50 looms, all developing the same thing. Now they have 50 different looms doing different stuff, and doing a week, a product run of 1 week, 2 weeks, or something like that, and then reprogramming it and running something through. So I mean, we're definitely seeing robotization, I think is the right word. Do I know that? Any linguists? We'll call it robotization. So you're seeing robotization. The work that is coming back that we're seeing in the developed world is, you know, you're dealing with very complex kinds of robots, but I think that where the money is the company that can come up with new designs, right? So that if you get, I mean, you know, that's so 5 minutes ago. We need the design for today.
But just to build on that point, I mean, one success story in the UK, and I don't want to labour the point, is Harris Tweed.
Right.
Multi-million-pound business now today here. Decades ago, it was on its desk. Before that, it was at the top of its game. So my point is that it's the artisan, and that's almost, for the moment, devoid of automation, because people are buying into the craftsmanship and the dedication of individuals and artisans to that craft. Downstream, I grant you, it will be automated.
Well, the art, I don't think will. I think that what we're seeing is that we're seeing this stuff here is that doesn't mean that's not just for big companies. You are seeing small companies. You've got places like Etsy. Anybody ever bought anything off of Etsy, which is all artisans and craft people? And my wedding ring was bought. I had to get a new one. I bought off of Etsy. It was made in Israel. And that's what, so that's a custom design. And that's the kind of thing that people are willing to pay for that. So I think, and that was passion by a goldsmith in Israel. You know, that it made a really neat design. It was something that you can't get, and I think you're seeing a lot of that. So we're seeing a whole bunch of different trends happening. So you can't automate the passion and the creativity side of things. So if Harris Tweed remains creative or bespoke or a status symbol, I mean, the ballpoint pen killed the fountain pen. But I'm sure there's somebody here who has a fountain pen, maybe a Mont Blanc or a Waterman or something like that. It's a status symbol, right? So the same thing as Harris Tweed. So you're going to see that. But I think in terms of work and stuff like that, well, how do you help someone become someone who can create the next Harris Tweed, I think is from a learning and development perspective. So again, the engine of the creative economy, according to Gary Hamel, is this stuff, that's it, talent. This, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not throwing too many wiring diagrams at you. This is as simple as I could make it. This is based on work by Verna Ali, Patty Anklam. They do a lot of work on, anybody know either of them? About knowledge networks, knowledge management, knowledge work. And this is based upon research. This is not my idea. I've just created the graph and used a few different words. But basically is that if you look at how knowledge networks work, an optimized knowledge network is based on openness, which enables transparency, which fosters a diversity of ideas, that reinforces openness, and we get the spiral, and what emerges from that is trust, right? And that's what the research shows us. So that if we're going to be working socially, and if we're going to be working in knowledge networks, I propose that you've got to have an optimized knowledge network, right? I mean, is there, and the way that this can be operationalized is that social networks in general are open in their very nature, right? Social network is a way in which you can easily share knowledge. I don't have to have permission, right? The difference between a social network and something like a learning management system is that LMS, permissions are set. Social network, I connect with whoever I want to connect with based upon whatever the rules are, right? So social networks, okay, got that, thanks. Social networks then enable the transparency, which is the knowledge sharing, right? Which becomes, why is that important? Because more and more knowledge is implicit, right? And so we need to know what people are doing. We need to sort of feel that emergence around. It's, John Seeley Brown talks about understanding complex systems, which is like all of us working together. And he says the only way to understand a complex system is to marinate in it. And what social networks allow us to do is to marinate in the digital artifacts that are created. So the more conversations and stories and things going on, the more in touch you are with what's happening. And that then fosters innovation. Is there anybody who works for an organization that doesn't think innovation is a good idea? I mean, it's all about innovation nowadays, right? We have to innovate. We got to do things faster. We got to do things better, okay? So again, if you take a look at it, social networks enable knowledge sharing, which foster innovation, reinforce that, and the only way that that can happen is with trust. There's very solid research that shows that work of Rob Cross, everybody familiar with his work on social networks, is that knowledge workers would only share complex knowledge, so like my understanding of the atom or something in my field, they'll only share that with people they trust, right? I mean, that kind of makes sense. You think about it as that you're not going to say what's your principle of learning? Who are you? Okay, but once you get to talking back and forth, I know this person back and forth, is that you start saying, yeah, I feel like I can actually say this is what I really think about all this stuff, and because we have a trusted relationship, we can do that, right? And that becomes a problem in hierarchical organizations. Why? Well, if I don't trust, here I have a case, one of my clients. So this is a company, and they have research teams, and the company has been laying off 20,000 people a year, right? And that's going to continue for a while. And the research folks are supposed to share their knowledge. But if a researcher gets a product and takes it to market, they get a bonus. They own some of the IP, the patent on that, and they get like big points on their annual evaluation. So I was asked a question. I said, so me, the researcher here in Britain, I can put my early knowledge out and put it into the social network, but we have the internal, secure kind of thing. And I can talk about it. And some fellow in Argentina can take it and actually create the product. Two things happen. He gets the bonus. He gets the extra points. I get laid off because the next round of cuts are coming. Right? And so that's what's actually happening. So what we're seeing is that what's happening in organizations actually works against this. And I didn't have any advice for them, unfortunately. So we take a look at social networks and knowledge sharing. So, okay, the green and the blue. And where they come together is an area that I call personal knowledge management. I'm not going to go into great detail on that. Those who know me know that I've written a lot about it, and I think is a foundational skill. I think it's a skill that not every learning professional has to know, but every single professional has to know. You can just Google PKM or personal knowledge management, and you'll find that, and fair bit of information on that. But that's kind of where social networks and knowledge sharing come together. And I've developed a relatively simple way of looking at it, and alliteration works. It sticks in people's brains. I developed this with a client, and they remembered it the next day, and so I stuck with it. So seek, sense, share, right? So that we personally curate the information flows and things around us. We make sense of them by actually doing something, and then we share them, and that becomes the social aspect of it. So PKM, my definition of it is it's a set of processes individually constructed to help each of us make sense of our world and work more effectively. It's on my blog if you want that, okay? So basically is that this is a foundational way that I think is, and whether it's you use this model or another model, it doesn't really matter. But I think the important thing is that more and more that aspect of curation, I mean, Garrett again was talking about that this morning, right? Is that storytelling, sense making, I think he said sense making many times, right? This is a process by which we can make better sense, particularly of the digital surround, but not obviating the personal surround. So how do we actually put this stuff all together? And I liken it to breathing. So if you take a look at your network, so the green on the outside, right? So I seek from my network, okay, the green. I breathe in and I filter it. And you can read through some of the stuff I have on there. Are a whole bunch of different ways of filtering, right? So these are some of the skills we need, whether I'm using mechanical filters, judgment filters, my Twitter network, or whatever. And I'm filtering it through, and then I am making sense of it either with my, I'm filtering it through my, the COP is community of practice, right? So with my trusted people, where we have some trust and we can talk and we know each other. Filter it through with the community of practice, say, hey, that's an interesting idea. Anybody else done something like that? Right? So we might have a conversation about that. It could be Twitter, it could be LinkedIn group, it could be Yammer, it doesn't really matter. It could be SharePoint, whatever it is that you're using to connect with other professionals, both inside and outside the organization. And then with myself, I'm making sense of this, and I strongly think that to actually be effective at this, you actually have to do something with it. Like you can collect all the bookmarks and all the other kinds of stuff out there, and you can have this wonderful system, aggregated content, but unless you actually do something with it, it's not going to stick in. So in my case, I blog, right? So my blogging is an active process of writing stuff out and making sense of it, and I call my blog a place for my half-baked ideas. You know, nothing fully baked ever gets published on it. And because I do it in a public way, right, is so I've created something, and then I share it. Right? Now, in PKM is that in some cases I might share it internally first. Right? I discern with whom I'm going to share it with, and then out it goes. So basically, I'm going outside to my big network, bringing things in, filtering it to my communities of practice, the various groups I work with, bringing that back in either to my work team or my own work, creating something out of it, and then pushing that back out again. And it's a constant flow back and forth of making sense of creating that implicit knowledge, right? So I'm trying to make that implicit knowledge slightly more explicit, right? It'll never be perfect, but without trying, we're not going to get anywhere. So I mean, all of this is approximation. I'm saying one thing. I think I am being so clear, and I'm sure there are people sitting here going like, "What the heck is he talking about?" Right? So we have to keep practicing and doing it and going back and forth. So that's PKM. So you take a look at it, is that this is pretty well, remember the network, the three networks that Garrett showed, the one for everybody distributed and then everybody together higher. And this is the same thing. This is, Tom Malone has used this one. You've probably seen it in dozens of different ones. But basically is that kind of up to the 19th century, most work was artisanal, right? It was based upon, it was small groups, cottage industry kind of stuff, right? And most learning for work was some kind of apprenticeship model, right? Is that there was a master, there might have been a journeyman, and then people did the work, and you did your time, and you learned from the master, right? Come the 20th century, the Great War, the Second War, and all those other kinds of things that we did to mess things up, we had a few things. One is that corporations came about with, with cheap oil, right? And so, I mean, the first major corporation was Standard Oil, right? Why? Because they needed to control everything from exploration to extraction to shipping to refining to building a whole network of gas stations so people could get what they needed, right? So they had to build an entire system, and a corporation was the logical thing. And what rose from that? I mean, how many training specialists were there in 1850? I'm thinking not that many. Maybe in the church, you know, there might have been somebody in charge of, you know, new priest training or something. And now we're coming into the 21st century, and that the dominant work model is shifting from corporations to networks. We're seeing that. Everything is getting network digitized and things like that. And the dominant learning for work model is SOCOMO, right? Oh, come on. Okay, so would be for social, collaborative, yeah, okay. Yeah, social, collaborative, mobile, right? And again, I mean, it was great having Garrett this morning because that's what he's talked about, right? Is does anybody disagree with that? Is that learning is needs to be more social? Needs to be more collaborative? Interesting study done on knowledge. 20 years ago, then this is work done by Robert Kelly out of Carnegie Mellon University, of senior managers and executives, and there were several thousand who were surveyed, is that they had about 75% of the knowledge they needed to do their work every day. When they went into the office, they had 75%, and they could pretty well do what they needed. They had to get some information, knowledge from other people. By 2009, I think, or 2006 was the last one, it was down to 9%. They had 9% of the knowledge they needed to do their work, right? So it's got to be collaborative because none of us can do our job, our real work, without connecting to other people. That's reality. So, anybody familiar with Dave Weinberger? Anybody read the Clue Train Manifesto? Joho, the blog, so the Journal of the of the hyperlinked organization. The crumbling of the paper authorities. Very interesting stuff that he's talked about in that we have been in a paper-based, print-based society since 1550, 1600, whatever you want to say, post-Gutenberg, right? And that we take for granted the linear nature of printed knowledge in books, right? But you know what? That was a fiction to begin with, right? And now the reality is that it isn't. And that means that we have to engage in knowledge making, knowledge creation, because knowledge has always been a shared type of activity. It hasn't been the expert on the stage spouting off and you're saying, yeah, you're right, you're wrong. I mean, the back channel will tell me I'm wrong. Right? So we've got that. And so when we take a look at it is that we have to help people and ourselves to take personal and social responsibility, right, for what we know. That means knowledge is co-created, it's constantly changing, it's constantly being renegotiated. And I think that is the huge challenge for learning professionals for the next 10, 20, 30 years, is how do we do that? So Dave Weinberg, and he's not a learning technology kind of guy, right? So I think he's hit the nail on the head. So how do we do it? Well, remember this one here, social networks, knowledge sharing, innovation. I think that whole notion of becoming explicit, I think that's the job of what learning and development training professionals have to do, is helping everyone in the organization become more explicit. And how do you do it? And that left-hand side is that if we can focus on openness, enabling transparency, social networks, driving knowledge sharing, the rest of the company can handle the innovation side. That will happen. So really, when you take a look at it, what's the future role of learning and development? It's providing the foundation for innovation. So this is your business case. I'll post this on SlideShare as well if you want it. So this is the business case for learning in the 21st century and learning professionals and the structure of it. But it's very, like, this isn't your daddy's organization, right? Very different kind of thing. And I would be most interested in anybody disagreeing, so we can get going on it. Thank you. Here endeth the lesson. Okay.
You have 15 minutes to which to discuss this proposition.
Yes, sir.
Are you saying, in fact, that learning and development professionals must become much more involved in organisation and culture development?
I think that, who was it that, is Leslie here? Yes. We talked about that last night. The number of, what was the, not the test, but the survey that was done on the capability map, and that one of the biggest weaknesses was understanding the business, right? And I think that is an indicator, is that if you don't know the business that you're supporting. I've worked with clients where we've actually killed the training and development department and moved everybody into the lines of business, and they seems to work well. Unfortunately, over half of the old training people lost their jobs because they couldn't make the transition. But yeah, I mean, if I was advising somebody, I would say yes. If you're not connected to, because everybody is connected, if you're not connected, I think you're going to be irrelevant, redundant, obsolete.
Question on the left here.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
What do people mean by trust these days?
Well, the way that I would define trust in the model is trust is a willingness to share. So that means is that you would be willing to share, because in this case it's a knowledge network, and what makes a knowledge network flow is a free flow of knowledge assets, because you can't transfer knowledge. If you could, I could just sort of do a brain dump and you would have it. But we can be more explicit in what we're doing, and we can share that. So the more explicit I can be, the more that we can go back and forth and say, well, I disagree with what you said there, I don't quite understand that, and we then negotiate, we get this negotiation of knowledge. And so trust, yeah, in a knowledge network would be a willingness to share and, critical thinking, a willingness to question it, a willingness to put yourself out there and try something new, all those kinds. So really, a willingness to sort of bury yourself in front of others, metaphorically. Yeah, how do you get from A to B? And that's, in my preamble I talked about, you need to go through organizations that have a strong performance improvement culture within learning and development, do this shift better. If you are all traditional, just training delivery, like John Hagel and John Seeley Brown, their book, Push to Pull, right? Is that if you have a 100% push kind of training thing, you can't move to 100% pull social very easily. And so I've worked with organizations where the first thing that we do is that we take a core group of training folks and we develop them into performance consultants. And those performance consultants go into the lines of business and they start understanding things. And then we set up a social network that they can start sharing that back and forth. But they're not getting into sort of full-blown social, gee, we're narrating our work and everything is peachy keen. So I think that's a very, in my experience, that's a method that works. So yeah, I don't know if I haven't seen an organization that's sort of been able to leapfrog from mid-20th century to today very, very well.
I guess, see what you're saying, it makes sense, but isn't the fact that
Well, I've been invited in by people very low down the food chain, and so it's like, yeah, this is real nice, Harold, but you know the boss isn't going to go for it. And my suggestion is that if you think this is inevitable, if you believe Garrett and the other futurists who are saying that this is the new network digital world, is that you better be ready for it. And so my suggestion is you've got to develop the capabilities. You've got to master PKM or something like it. You have to be a good digital learner. You have to know how to share. You have to master these tools. And then you wait for the opportunity when someone says, I wish we'd done this thing differently. You say, oh, I have an example. Check this out. Let's do that. And I think you really wind up with two options. Like if you have drunk the Kool-Aid and you believe this, then either you hone your skills and you wait for your opportunity, and or you get ready to jump ship, because that company is probably not going to survive in, I mean, we're looking at the half-life of companies is going down the tubes. It used to be 1975, average age of a Fortune 1000, of a Fortune 1000 company was, in the decades. Now the average age of a Fortune 1000 company is like less than 10 years. I mean, everybody remember Netscape? Netscape was created, biggest one around, and now kaput, right? And what's the other one, the coupon company? Groupon, does it still exist? They were like the first company to go to $1 billion valuation in less than 12 months. Right? That's what we're going to see. You're going to see peaks and valleys that are higher and lower, and things are just going to get, I mean, if you think the last 10 years was crazy, the next 10 years are going to be way worse. And I think there's no doubt about it. So, but I believe that we can develop the skills, and we've got enough stuff, we've got enough understanding about network theory, about networks, about social learning, everything like that, that we can, we're only going to get through this together. And sharing with it, there's a lot of smart, well, who's the smartest person in the room? You know the saying, right? Right? The room, right? This room, I'm sure, could figure it out if we spent the time to do it.
You go first. I'll come to you
Sorry.
second.
Yeah, keep my hands behind my back.
So this is still only part of the picture, though, isn't it? You're not proposing that this replaces all formal training.
No, I'm not proposing that this replaces formal training. What I am saying is that the role of formal instruction is decreasing in terms of value to the enterprise, and that if you wish to be valuable to the enterprise, and I mean, unless you're in an institution that does nothing but formal training, well, that's your job, okay? What I'm saying is that in the workplace is that the really important stuff, or the of bigger importance, okay? I'm not going to say formal is, I mean, there is, again, lack of skills and knowledge, you need training, right? It's this huge opportunity that is being missed by a lot of learning and development professionals, I'd say.
And the lady here.
I was just thinking of the example you gave before of somebody in the UK coming up with a useful idea and then a guy in Argentina getting credit. Do you think we need to look at ways of rewarding people for sharing those initial ideas?
Do we need to find better ways to reward people for work? Yeah, anybody read Dan Pink's book Drive? He talks about, autonomy, mastery, sense of purpose, the only three things that drive people, and that if you get money off the table, like first you engage somebody, what would you be happy with to stop complaining about money? Okay, we're going to pay you there, and now you start focusing on providing value. That's one option. Garrett was talking about things like, even basic guaranteed income. Kinds of things, so people can then work on their passion, and that's a disconnect. And we identified that with the client, and they took it up the ladder. They said, "Look, it's the executive vice president of whatever that is responsible for that." I said, "Well, every single time you give a briefing, you can say we can't do the collaboration that you're asking us to do because you have a policy in place that works against it." And that's, unfortunately, that's all I think. But we can say those kinds of things. We can say things that compliance training, for the most part, is useless. But as an industry, you're not hearing that very often, right? And some of those other things I think we need to be saying is that social learning is really important stuff. And we need to support it, and we need to help our companies do it.
Oh, yes, gentleman on the end there.
What's your view on, you talked about talent, some of the, whether you call them characteristics or behaviors or skills you alluded to. To what extent the focus should be away from knowledge and more towards building or helping people develop those
what's the role, or how much emphasis should we be putting on developing the talent, things like passion and creativity?
The focus is less about helping people gain some skill, the knowledge side, I guess, and more about developing them as individuals from
Yeah.
a behavioural problem.
Well, again, I refer back to this morning with Garrett, and he's saying is that, you know, when we live in this knowledge soup, right, how much of those bits, how much knowledge or content delivery do we need to focus on, as opposed to the meta skills, which critical thinking, I think, is probably the most important. And I define critical thinking as as questioning all assumptions, including your own, right? And I think that we need to get people working in that, and in environments, supporting environments where people are actually allowed to do that. I mean, can you ask that type of a tough question in a board meeting or in a meeting with the boss and things like that? So I think we do need to focus more on meta skills, the learning how to learn. That we find that with the workshops that we run is that, you know, some people are quite natural at it, and other people say, well, what's the learning objective and what do I have to do this week? So do whatever you want. You know, and that's a scary proposition, which our schools and other organizations I think have driven. But I think that there's real value. Well, we're seeing that, and that people are coming to us and saying, I want to develop better ways of taking control of my professional development. So I think that that's a growing field and a growing opportunity for L&D. Oh, I think there's one of the last, or are we finished?
Well, we've still got a couple of minutes. If there's...
Sure. And if anybody wants to come and talk to me afterwards, by all means. Did you want to do the last one there or not?
Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I didn't see you in the dark there. Sorry.
When I asked only talk about stuff about people doing personal, building a personal capability around sense making, I wonder, is there anything that, say CEO says, actually, I'm not into this. I'd like to get a sense of, I'd like to look at a maturity scale of, or some sort of index of what is my organisation? Where are the gaps in my capability? Who do I not have my organisation to innovate in the ways I need to do? What tools am I not using? I'm talking also in terms of types of conversations, facilitation, or is there anything like that exists?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of specific types of tools, capability maps. There's the community roundtable has a capability maturity index on how well organizations collaborate. I think they're all interesting tools, and we have to be very careful. I mean, or else we wind up, you know, becoming slavish adherents to I'm an X or a Y or a Z, and that's a bad thing. The tools that I've used with companies that seem to work a lot are like a hybrid version of social network analysis. Everybody familiar with social network analysis, looking at networks and how information flows and stuff. And the other one is value network analysis, which is looking at it from a business perspective, where you actually map tangible and intangible value. And I found that they don't solve anything, but they get the organization talking about that kind of stuff. And I think that for learning professionals, it's the more tools you've got in your box, the better it is. So I would try different ones, but only you understand the context of your organization.
Challenge I have is I do get the concept. It's actually then going to, because obviously there are other departments who they can bring into play with this. IT, for instance.
Yeah.
Internal communications. All the people that need to be involved, obviously then you senior leadership to invest in those resources in the way that's going to bring the company together. So it's trying to put it across in a very business case, professional way, to actually say that you need those in place in order to be able to innovate and to be able to keep relevant, as you say. But yeah, those are challenges.
Yeah. I'll just close a little bit of scariness is that all of that area about organizational support, whether you're knowledge management, IT, learning, HR, whatever three-letter acronym you want, everybody's fighting for that same mind share, right? I speak to KM organizations, I speak to OD and stuff like that. It's all the same issue. And when we talked about silos busting down, I think it was in Steve's presentation, is that all your silos are breaking. And from an organizational perspective, they don't care whether it's coming from learning or KM or OD or IT or communications. And so there are going to be some interesting internal battles going over all of that silo busting as well. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Okay, very last question then, this lady here.
Yes.
You just threw in there about compliance training being useless.
Pardon me?
You mentioned about compliance training being useless. I work for an oil company and we're quite keen on compliance training. So can you say a bit more about that?
BP oil spill?
Yeah.
Okay, but did compliance training help? It wasn't compliance. Yeah. The thing is, the problem with, again, is that compliance training, and my colleague Charles Jennings, who used to be a C-level executive, has said it very clearly, is that compliance training is a really good tool to keep CEOs out of jail. And the thing is that there isn't always the correlation causation. Some cases, I just took some compliance training for the first time in many, many years on commercial boat safety. You know, I don't think 500 PowerPoint slides made me safer doing commercial boats, right? So I just think that the thing is that with compliance training is that unfortunately it's a big cash cow because it's mandated. And I think that there's a whole bunch of better ways and mixed ways that we can do it. There might be as in courses might be a piece, better job aids, better all kinds, those 6 things in there. I think motivations and feedback and stuff like that could actually make the because the aim is safety, isn't it? Right, for most compliance, right? Safety or adherence, right? So I think there's a whole bunch of other ways of doing it, and unfortunately is that when you've got the training Aspirin coming at it and say, okay, check, they got their compliance training, we can now ship them out on the rigs, right? But you know what, the problem isn't the workers, the problem is the executives or whatever. Yeah, so anyway, I did throw it out there, I know it was purposefully, sorry. Thanks.
Well, there, I'm afraid we have to draw it to a close, but I'm sure Harold will be happy to hang around for a little bit afterwards to ask any questions you might have. Thanks very much for listening. Let's give a big round of applause for Harold Jarche.